One of America's most extraordinary lakes is disappearing almost entirely. The Great Salt Lake once stretched across northern Utah like an inland sea, supporting millions of migratory birds, powering billion-dollar industries, and even helping create the world-famous snow that blankets Utah's mountains every winter. Today, much of that water is gone. Boats sit stranded in dry marinas. Miles of cracked lakebed have emerged where waves once rolled, and scientists warn that toxic dust carrying arsenic and other harmful particles could soon threaten the health of millions of people. So how did one of North America's most important lakes reach the brink of collapse? And, more importantly, is there still time to save it before it disappears forever? The Great Salt Lake is unlike almost every other major lake in the world because it has no outlet. It belongs to what geologists call an endorheic basin, a closed drainage system where rivers flow into the lake, but no water flows back out to the sea. Three major rivers feed the lake: the Bear River, the Weber River, and the Jordan River. Every spring, snowmelt from the Wasatch Mountains and surrounding ranges carries fresh water downhill into the basin. But once that water reaches the lake, it has nowhere to go except into the atmosphere. Year after year, the relentless Utah sun evaporates enormous quantities of water while leaving every grain of dissolved salt behind. This process has been repeating for thousands of years. The Great Salt Lake is actually the last remaining fragment of an enormous prehistoric body of water known as Lake Bonneville. During the last ice age, Lake Bonneville covered nearly 20,000 square miles. As the climate warmed roughly 14,000 years ago, the massive lake gradually disappeared, leaving behind only scattered remnants. The largest survivor is today's Great Salt Lake, because salt continually accumulates while water continually evaporates. The lake has become one of the saltiest large lakes on Earth. Depending on location, its salinity ranges from roughly 5 times that of seawater to nearly 10 times higher in some areas. Few organisms can survive under such extreme conditions. Yet, remarkably, the lake supports one of the world's most specialized ecosystems. Before we continue, don't forget to click on that subscribe button and like this video, as it's the best way to support this channel. At first glance, the Great Salt Lake appears almost lifeless. There are no commercial fisheries, no dolphins, no forests along its shores, but beneath its surface exists an ecosystem found almost nowhere else. Tiny algae thrive in the salty water, converting sunlight into energy. These microscopic organisms feed vast populations of brine shrimp and brine flies, small creatures that have adapted perfectly to the lake's harsh chemistry. Their numbers are staggering. During peak seasons, trillions of brine shrimp inhabit the lake, while billions of brine flies blanket the shoreline. Individually, they seem insignificant, but together, they form the foundation of an ecosystem that supports millions of birds every year. The Great Salt Lake sits directly along the Pacific Flyway, one of North America's most important migratory bird routes. Roughly 10 million migratory birds depend on the lake annually. Some species stop briefly to refuel during migrations that stretch from Alaska to South America. Others remain for weeks while feeding on the lake's abundant shrimp and flies. For these birds, there is no equivalent replacement. If the Great Salt Lake disappears, there is nowhere else large enough to absorb millions of displaced migrants. The lake's importance extends far beyond wildlife. For generations, Utah has built industries around this unusual environment. Perhaps the most famous is the brine shrimp industry. Every year, companies harvest billions of tiny shrimp eggs, known as cysts, from the lake. These cysts are exported around the world to feed fish and shrimp raised in aquaculture facilities from Asia to South America. It is a surprisingly valuable global business, supplying hatcheries that produce seafood consumed by millions of people. The lake is also rich in minerals. Companies extract magnesium, sodium chloride, potassium sulfate, and other valuable compounds through large evaporation ponds. Tourism adds another layer to the economy. Visitors come to float effortlessly in the dense, salty water, photograph spectacular sunsets, explore Antelope Island, watch millions of migratory birds, or simply experience one of the world's most unusual landscapes. Then there is winter. The Great Salt Lake acts as a giant natural humidifier. Cold air sweeping across its relatively warm waters absorbs moisture before rising over the nearby Wasatch Mountains, producing what meteorologists call lake effect snow. This process helps create the legendary powder snow that attracts skiers from around the world and supports one of Utah's largest tourism industries. For centuries, the lake naturally expanded and contracted depending on wet and dry years. Fluctuating water levels were completely normal, but something changed during the 20th century. As Utah's population exploded, so did demand for water. The Wasatch Front, including Salt Lake City, Ogden, and Provo, became home to millions of residents. New suburbs expanded across former farmland. Agriculture intensified. Industries grew. Every new home, every farm, every factory, and every golf course required water. Nearly all of that water originally came from rivers that once flowed freely into the Great Salt Lake. Instead of reaching the lake, increasing amounts were diverted into reservoirs, irrigation canals, municipal pipelines, and industrial systems. Today, scientists estimate that roughly 2/3 of the water that historically reached the lake is now consumed before it ever arrives. Human water use alone cannot explain the scale of the decline. Climate change has intensified nearly every process working against the lake. Warmer air increases evaporation, allowing more water to leave the lake's surface every year. Higher temperatures also reduce mountain snowpack. Snow melts earlier in spring, rivers peak sooner, and less water remains available during the hot summer months when evaporation reaches its maximum. The result is a vicious cycle that amplifies a problem already created by excessive water consumption. Perhaps the most frightening consequence of the shrinking lake is what is being exposed. As water retreats, thousands of acres of ancient lakebed emerge into the open air. For centuries, these sediments quietly rested beneath shallow water. Now they dry into fine powder. Every strong wind becomes capable of lifting that powder into enormous dust storms. Unlike ordinary desert dust, these sediments contain a mixture of salts, heavy metals, and naturally occurring arsenic that accumulated over thousands of years from rivers draining the surrounding mountains. Scientists are still studying exactly how dangerous prolonged exposure could become, but the concern is serious. Fine airborne particles are already known to worsen asthma, increase respiratory illnesses, aggravate cardiovascular disease, and reduce overall air quality. Northern Utah's growing population lives directly downwind of much of the exposed lakebed. If drying continues, toxic dust could become one of the region's most persistent environmental hazards. Many experts compare the situation to California's Owens Lake. After Los Angeles diverted the rivers feeding Owens Lake during the early 20th century, the lake largely disappeared, exposing massive dust-producing sediments. It eventually became the largest source of particulate air pollution in the United States, until billions of dollars were spent controlling the dust. Scientists fear the Great Salt Lake could follow a similar path, but on an even larger scale. Despite the alarming headlines, scientists do not believe the Great Salt Lake is doomed. Unlike many environmental disasters, the solution is conceptually simple. The lake needs more water. The challenge lies in deciding where that water comes from. Agriculture currently accounts for the overwhelming majority of water consumption within the watershed. Improving irrigation efficiency, changing crop choices, reducing water-intensive landscaping, and encouraging urban conservation could all increase the amount of water reaching the lake. Utah has already begun implementing important reforms. Lawmakers have approved measures allowing water rights to be dedicated specifically to the lake, expanded conservation programs, funded wetland restoration, and encouraged more efficient water use. These are meaningful steps, but many scientists argue they are only the beginning. Because the Great Salt Lake responds slowly, recovery will likely require years of sustained effort rather than a single exceptionally wet winter. The Great Salt Lake has demonstrated remarkable resilience over thousands of years. Whether it survives the 21st century depends not on geology, but on human choices. The Great Salt Lake is often called Utah's inland sea. Today, that sea is slowly disappearing, not because nature has abandoned it, but because the water that once sustained it is being captured long before it arrives. Every year that passes without meaningful action allows the shoreline to retreat a little farther, exposes a little more toxic dust, and pushes one of North America's most extraordinary ecosystems closer to collapse. Its death is not yet certain, but its future is being decided right now.